The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of St. Louis, Missouri, as Rebecca Phelps ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild stallion. It was 1878, and she had just witnessed the murder of the only person who had ever shown her a modicum of kindness, her elderly employer, Mrs. Holloway. The killer, none other than the woman's own nephew, had caught Rebecca hiding in the shadows and now hunted her through the town like prey. Rebecca pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her slender shoulders, her dark auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she crawled away from her hiding spot. 23 years of life had taught her to stay quiet, to become invisible, and to never expect mercy from anyone, especially men. "I know you're out there, girl," the voice rang out, followed by another gunshot that splintered the wooden post just inches from her head. She scrambled to her feet and ran blindly down an alleyway, her worn boots slipping on the muddy ground. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the spring air still hung heavy with moisture. Rebecca turned a corner and collided hard with something solid. Someone, strong hands steadied her, preventing her fall. She looked up, terrified, into the face of a stranger. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky, he wore the unmistakable attire of a cowboy, dusty, well-worn, and practical. "Whoa there," he said, his voice low and calm. "You're running like the devil himself is on your tail." "He might as well be," Rebecca gasped, trying to pull away. "Please let me go, he'll kill me too if he finds me," the man's expression hardened. "Who's after you?" Before she could answer, the sound of boots sloshing through mud reached them. Without hesitation, the cowboy pulled Rebecca into a narrow space between buildings, pressing her against the wall and shielding her with his body. His hand came up gently, so gently to cover her mouth. "Trust me," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Rebecca trembled, unused to such proximity with a man who wasn't trying to harm her. The gentleness of his touch was foreign, unsettling. The nephew stalked past their hiding place, gun drawn, muttering curses. When his footsteps faded, the cowboy stepped back, giving Rebecca space to breathe. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Name's Jackson Xavier," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Most folks call me Jax, Rebecca Phelps." Jackson's eyes narrowed as he took in her disheveled appearance and the fear still evident in her green eyes. "You need a safe place, Miss Phelps. That man doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily." "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. "Mrs. Holloway she employed me as her companion. Her nephew killed her for her money, and I saw it happen." Jackson considered this information, his expression unreadable. "I've got a room at the Westward Inn. You can hide there while we figure out what to do." Rebecca stiffened, taking a step back. "I don't go to men's rooms, Mr. Xavier." A flash of understanding crossed his features, followed by something that looked remarkably like sadness. "I'll get you your own room then, but we need to move quickly." Against her better judgment, Rebecca followed Jackson through back alleys and side streets until they reached the Westward Inn, a modest two-story building on the edge of town. True to his word, Jackson secured a separate room for her and handed her the key. "Lock your door," he instructed. "I'll bring you something to eat." Alone in the small room, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. Her hands shook as she removed her mud-stained shawl. 20 minutes later, a soft knock at the door startled her. "It's Jackson," came the quiet voice. She opened the door just enough to see him standing there with a tray of food and a clean dress draped over his arm. "The innkeeper's wife offered this," he explained, nodding toward the garment, "said it might fit you." Rebecca accepted the items, their fingers briefly touching during the exchange. She flinched involuntarily. "I won't hurt you," Jackson said softly, noticing her reaction. "I've heard that before," she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Jackson's gaze was steady. "I reckon you have, but I mean it." After he left, Rebecca changed into the borrowed dress, a simple blue cotton that was slightly big but clean and whole. She ate the stew and bread he'd brought, realizing she couldn't remember her last proper meal. The following morning brought a knock at her door. Jackson stood there, hat in hand, looking like he'd slept poorly. "Sheriff's looking for you," he said without preamble. "Not to help seems Holloway's nephew has friends in high places." Rebecca's heart sank. "What do I do?" "I'm heading west to my ranch in Colorado Territory. It's a long journey, but you'd be safe there until this blows over." He hesitated. "Or I can help you get passage on a riverboat heading north." Rebecca studied him, trying to discern his motives. In her experience, men always wanted something. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "My ma raised me to believe that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who need help," Jackson replied simply. "Besides, I know what it's like to be hunted." Before she could respond, commotion downstairs caught their attention. Through the window, Rebecca spotted the sheriff and Holloway's nephew entering the inn. "Time's up," Jackson said grimly. "What's your decision?" In that moment, with danger closing in and nowhere else to turn, Rebecca made her choice. Colorado. They slipped out through a back window, moving quickly to the stables where Jackson had his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, and a pack horse loaded with supplies. He helped Rebecca mount behind him, her skirts hiked indecently high as she straddled the animal. "Hold on tight," he instructed, and she reluctantly placed her hands at his waist, keeping as much distance between their bodies as possible. They rode hard out of St. Louis, taking back roads and trails to avoid pursuit. By nightfall, they had crossed into rural countryside, and Jackson deemed it safe enough to make camp by a small stream. Rebecca kept her distance as he efficiently built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. The tension in her shoulders hadn't eased since they'd fled town. "You don't trust easy," Jackson observed, offering her a tin plate of food. Rebecca accepted it, careful not to touch his fingers. "Trust is a luxury I've never been able to afford." "Fair enough." He settled on the opposite side of the fire. "But if we're going to travel together for the next few weeks, it might help to know why you flinch every time I come near you." Rebecca stared into the flames, weighing how much to reveal. "Men have only ever shown me cruelty," she finally said. "My father was a drunk who used his fists freely. The homes I worked in after his death were no better. Men see a woman alone and think she's theirs for the taking." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Not all men are like that. Maybe not, but enough for that I've learned my lesson." She set down her half-eaten meal. "I've never known gentleness from a man, Mr. Xavier. I don't expect to start now." Jackson's blue eyes reflected the firelight as he regarded her thoughtfully. "Then let me teach you," he said softly. "Not all touches are meant to hurt, Miss Phelps." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in Rebecca's chest, something dangerous like hope. She looked away. "We should rest. It's a long journey, you said." Jackson nodded, respecting her withdrawal. "I'll take first watch." In the days that followed, they established a careful routine. Jackson gave Rebecca as much space and privacy as possible given their circumstances. He taught her to ride on her own when they acquired a second horse at a small trading post, patiently showing her how to guide the animal with gentle pressure from her knees rather than harsh yanks on the reins. "She responds better to kindness," he explained, demonstrating how to stroke the mare's neck in encouragement. "Most creatures do." Rebecca found herself watching Jackson when he thought she wasn't looking the way his strong hands moved with surprising delicacy, when tending a small cut on his horse's leg, how he spoke in that low, soothing voice to calm the animal. She began to wonder if perhaps this man might truly be different. A week into their journey, they stopped in a small town to replenish supplies. The general store owner eyed Rebecca suspiciously, noting her traveling alone with a man who wasn't her husband. "We don't want trouble here," the man said pointedly to Jackson. Before Jackson could respond, Rebecca stepped forward. "I'm his sister," she lied smoothly. "Our parents died and we're traveling to join relatives." The storekeeper's expression softened slightly, and Jackson shot her a look of surprised approval. As they left the store, he leaned close, though still careful not to touch her. "Quick thinking back there," he murmured. Rebecca felt an unexpected flush of pride at his praise. "I've had practice creating stories to explain my circumstances." That night, as they made camp under a canopy of stars, Rebecca found herself relaxing enough to ask Jackson about his ranch. "It's nothing grand," he said, his face softening with fondness. 200 acres in a valley with a creek running through it, good grazing land. I've got a small herd of cattle, a few horses." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Built the cabin myself." "How did you come to have a ranch so young?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. A shadow crossed Jackson's face. "I wasn't always a rancher. After the war I fought for the Union. I did some work I'm not proud of, bounty hunting mostly." He met her gaze directly. "That's how I know what it's like to be hunted. I made enemies." "What changed?" "I tracked a man to Colorado. He'd been accused of murder, but when I found him..." Jackson's voice grew distant. "He was just an old man who defended his daughter from a rich man's son. The kind of justice that depends on who you are isn't justice at all." Rebecca nodded, understanding all too well. "I let him go," Jackson continued. "Then I took my savings and bought land as far from people as I could manage." He smiled slightly. "Found some peace there." "It sounds lovely," Rebecca said softly, surprised to find she meant it. "It can be lonely," he admitted, "but it's mine." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. For the first time since they'd met, Rebecca felt something like trust unfurling inside her. The following day brought danger when they encountered a group of rough-looking men at a river crossing. Their leering glances at Rebecca made her shrink into herself, her old fears resurfacing. Jackson positioned himself between her and the men. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said pleasantly enough, though Rebecca noted how his right hand hovered near his holstered gun. "That's a mighty pretty traveling companion you've got there," said the apparent leader, a man with a scar cutting through his beard. "Might be you'd consider sharing." "Might be you'd consider minding your own business," Jackson replied, his voice hardening. "We're just passing through." The tension stretched until Rebecca feared violence was inevitable. Then Jackson shifted slightly, and something in his stance must have communicated his readiness to fight, because the leader's eyes narrowed in reassessment. "Come on, boys," he finally said. "Plenty of other diversions to be had." They rode off, but not before the leader called back, "Sleep light, cowboy." That night, Jackson insisted they travel several more hours before making camp well off the main trail. He was quieter than usual as they ate. "Thank you," Rebecca said, breaking the silence. "For earlier." Jackson looked up, his expression serious. "No man has the right to look at a woman that way, like she's something to be used." He hesitated. "Is that what you've known, Rebecca? Men treating you like property?" Her name on his lips sounded different, somehow respectful, almost reverent. "Yes," she admitted. "Or worse." "I'm sorry," he said simply, and in those two words was more genuine understanding than she'd ever heard. That night, Rebecca dreamed of hands, not the cruel, grasping hands of her past, but strong, gentle ones that offered protection without demanding submission. She woke confused, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. The landscape changed as they traveled west, the gentle rolling hills giving way to more dramatic terrain. Rebecca found herself mesmerized by the vast open spaces, the endless sky that seemed to promise freedom. "It's beautiful," she said one afternoon as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a sweeping valley. Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Wait until you see the mountains." And when she did, days later, the breath caught in her throat. Massive peaks rose in the distance, their snow-capped summits gleaming in the sunlight like beacons. "They don't look real," she whispered. "First time I saw them, I thought the same," Jackson said, a rare note of wonder in his voice. "Made me feel small in a good way. Like my troubles couldn't possibly matter much against something so ancient and enduring." They camped that night within sight of the mountains, and Rebecca found herself opening up about her past, her mother's death when she was just 8, her father's descent into alcoholism and violence, her years of servitude in households where she was treated as little more than furniture, or worse, as an outlet for the master's baser impulses. Jackson listened without interruption, his face grave but compassionate. When she finished, he stared into the fire for a long moment. "The world has been cruel to you," he finally said. "You've survived more than anyone should have to." "Not just survived," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. I never let them break me. I never stopped believing I deserved better, even when there was no evidence to support it. Jackson's eyes met hers across the flames, filled with something that made her heart skip. You were right to believe that. You do deserve better. The following day, disaster struck when Rebecca's horse stepped in a gopher hole, stumbling badly and throwing her. Jackson was off his mount in an instant, rushing to where she lay stunned on the ground. Rebecca. The panic in his voice penetrated her daze. Are you hurt? She tried to sit up, only to gasp as pain shot through her ankle. My foot, she managed. Jackson knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly. I need to check if it's broken. May I? The request for permission so foreign to her experience made Rebecca nod despite her apprehension. His touch, when it came, was tentative and careful as he gently examined her ankle, apologizing whenever she winced. I don't think it's broken, he said finally. Sprained, most likely. But you can't ride. They made camp early, Jackson creating a comfortable spot for Rebecca with their bedrolls and his spare clothing. He wrapped her ankle with strips torn from a clean shirt, his movements so gentle she could hardly believe the strength she knew those hands possessed. Why are you like this? She asked abruptly. Jackson looked up, confused. Like what? Gentle, kind, she gestured vaguely. Not like other men. He sat back on his heels, considering her question seriously. I told you about my ma. She raised me to respect women, all people really. He paused. But I wasn't always this way. After the war, I was angry, violent, his eyes clouded with memory. I hurt people, justified it by saying they deserved it. What changed you? A woman, he said simply. Jenny Westbrook. She was a preacher's daughter in a town where I was hunting a man. She saw through my excuses, told me I was becoming the very thing I claimed to hate. A sad smile touched his lips. She made me want to be better. Did you love her? Rebecca asked, surprising herself with the question and the strange twist of emotion that accompanied it. I thought I might, given time, Jackson admitted, but she died of fever before I could find out. He met Rebecca's gaze. She taught me that gentleness isn't weakness, it's choice and strength. That night, when the temperature dropped unexpectedly and Rebecca shivered in her bedroll, Jackson hesitantly offered his coat as extra covering. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, and for the first time she didn't flinch away. By morning, Rebecca's ankle had swollen badly. Jackson fashioned a crude crutch from a forked branch, but it was clear she couldn't travel far. My ranch is still 3 days' ride, he said, concern etching lines around his eyes. There's a settlement about half a day south of here. They have a doctor. I don't want to delay you, Rebecca protested, though the thought of parting from Jackson sent an unexpected pang through her chest. He looked at her incredulously. I'm not leaving you, Rebecca. The simple declaration settled over her like a warm blanket, and she found herself believing him. The settlement turned out to be little more than a cluster of buildings centered around a mining operation. But as Jackson had promised, there was a doctor, a gruff older man named Dr. Simmons, who confirmed the sprain and recommended several days of rest. Jackson secured them rooms at the town's only boarding house, run by a widow named Mrs. Carter who eyed them suspiciously until Jackson explained their situation, emphasizing that Rebecca was under his protection, but not in a compromising arrangement. For 3 days, Rebecca rested while Jackson tended to their horses and supplies. He brought her meals and books borrowed from Mrs. Carter and spent hours sitting by her bed, telling stories about his ranch and the characters he'd encountered in his travels. On the 4th day, Rebecca insisted on coming downstairs for dinner, unwilling to remain an invalid any longer. With Jackson's support, she made it to the dining room, where several miners and the local schoolteacher were also taking their evening meal. Mrs. Carter served a hearty stew, and the conversation flowed easily, with the schoolteacher, Miss Abigail Franklin, taking particular interest in Rebecca's journey. It's terribly brave of you, she said, her eyes wide behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Traveling so far with only Mr. Xavier as escort. Jackson has been a perfect gentleman, Rebecca replied, surprising herself with the warmth in her voice. Across the table, Jackson's eyes met hers, a slow smile spreading across his face that made her cheeks heat inexplicably. Later, as he helped her back to her room, his hand steady under her elbow, Rebecca found herself leaning into his support more than strictly necessary. "You're getting stronger," he observed as they reached her door. "Yes." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of their proximity in the narrow hallway. "Jackson, she faltered, uncertain of what she wanted to say. He waited patiently, his blue eyes searching her face. "Yes, thank you," she managed finally, "for everything." Something like disappointment flickered across his features before he smiled. "You're welcome, Rebecca. Good night." As she closed the door behind her, Rebecca pressed a hand to her racing heart, confronting the realization that somewhere between St. Louis and this dusty mining town, her feelings for Jackson Xavier had transformed into something far more complex than gratitude. They resumed their journey 2 days later, Rebecca's ankle much improved though still tender. Jackson had acquired a gentler horse for her, and they traveled at an easier pace, the silence between them now comfortable rather than strained. On their second day back on the trail, spring rain caught them unawares, soaking them both before they could find shelter in an abandoned trapper's cabin. The small space felt intimate as they hung their wet outer clothing to dry, and Jackson built a fire in the small hearth. Rebecca shivered in her damp dress, and without comment, Jackson handed her his spare shirt dry as it had been in his saddlebag. "Turn around," she requested, and he immediately complied, facing the wall while she changed into the oversized garment, rolling up the sleeves that hung past her fingertips. "Decent now," she said, and when he turned, something in his expression as he looked at her made her breath catch. "I should check your ankle," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Rebecca sat on the cabin's only chair, extending her leg. Jackson knelt before her, his touch clinical yet somehow intimate as he unwrapped the bandage and examined the fading bruises. "Healing well," he murmured, but he didn't move away immediately. "Jackson," Rebecca said softly, gathering her courage, "earlier at the boarding house I wanted to say something else." He looked up, still kneeling before her, vulnerability plain in his eyes. "I'm listening." "I've spent my life running from men's touch," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But these past weeks, I've come to see that not all touches are meant to control or hurt." She took a deep breath. "You've shown me gentleness I didn't believe existed." Jackson's expression softened, hope dawning across his features. Slowly, telegraphing his movements, he raised his hand toward her face, pausing just before making contact. "May I?" he asked, and the respect in that simple question nearly undid her. Rebecca nodded, and his calloused fingertips brushed her cheek with exquisite tenderness, tracing a path down to her jaw as if she were made of the finest porcelain. "I would never hurt you," he whispered, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you crashed into me in that alley." The words hung between them, an offering rather than a demand. Rebecca raised her own hand, hesitantly touching his weather-roughened cheek, marveling at how such strength could exist alongside such gentleness. "I don't know if I remember how to love," she admitted, "but I want to learn with you." Jackson's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. They reached Jackson's ranch 2 days later, cresting a hill to reveal a valley cradled between mountain foothills, a stream cutting through verdant pastureland where cattle grazed peacefully. The cabin was larger than Rebecca had imagined, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch wrapping around 2 sides. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the scene. Jackson watched her reaction anxiously. "It needs a woman's touch," he said. "It's functional but not very homey." Rebecca smiled, understanding the question beneath his statement. "I think I could help with that." His answering grin was boyish in its delight. "I was hoping you'd say that." They were married 3 months later by a circuit preacher who stopped at the nearest settlement. Rebecca wore a new blue dress that Jackson had ridden 2 days to purchase from a proper store, and wild mountain flowers in her hair. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Rebecca planted a vegetable garden and added curtains and cushions that transformed the cabin into a home. Jackson taught her to ride properly, to shoot for protection, and to appreciate the stunning beauty of their mountain valley in all seasons. But most importantly, he taught her about gentleness in the way he held her at night, in his patience when memories of her past sometimes made her pull away, in the respect with which he treated her opinions and wishes. A year after her arrival, Rebecca sat on the porch swing Jackson had built for her, watching him return from checking the herd. The sight of him still made her heart quicken, especially now. He dismounted and approached, his smile warming as he took in her appearance. "You're glowing today," he observed, sitting beside her and taking her hand in his. Rebecca guided his palm to rest against her still flat stomach. "I have news," she said softly. Jackson's eyes widened, comprehension dawning slowly. "Are you certain?" She nodded, watching joy spread across his beloved face. Completely certain, he gathered her gently into his arms, his touch reverent as always. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed against her hair. "A home, a family, someone to love who loves me back." "Nor did I," Rebecca said, leaning back to meet his gaze. "I never knew gentleness could exist like this between a man and a woman. I never knew love could feel safe." Jackson pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. "I promise to teach you," he reminded her with a smile. "Though I think you've taught me just as much about courage and strength." 6 months later, their son was born as winter settled over the valley. They named him Thomas, after Jackson's father, and Rebecca marveled at how naturally gentleness came to Jackson as he cradled his newborn son. "He has your eyes," Jackson whispered as they sat before the fire on their son's first night in the world. "And your chin," Rebecca replied, tracing the sleeping infant's face with a fingertip. "He'll be strong and kind like his father." "And resilient and brave like his mother," Jackson added, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter joined them 2 years after Thomas, a spirited girl with Rebecca's auburn hair who they named Sarah after Jackson's mother. The ranch prospered, allowing them to build additional rooms onto the cabin and hire help during the busy seasons. Rebecca never forgot the fear and pain of her early life, but those memories no longer held power over her. Instead, she used her experiences to help other women in need, offering refuge at the ranch for those escaping situations like the one she had fled. One evening, 10 years after that fateful day in St. Louis, Rebecca and Jackson sat on their porch watching their children play with the new colts in the paddock nearby. Jackson's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, his thumb tracing absent patterns against her sleeve. "Do you ever think about how we met?" he asked, following her gaze to where Thomas was showing his younger sister how to offer an apple to a dappled foal. "Often," Rebecca admitted. "How different my life would have been if I hadn't run down that particular alley." Jackson smiled. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." Rebecca leaned into his embrace, savoring the safety and love she'd found in his arms. "I used to believe the world was nothing but cruelty and pain," she mused. "You taught me otherwise." "We taught each other," Jackson corrected gently. "Love isn't something one person gives and another takes. It's something we build together day by day." As the sun set over their mountain valley, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a frightened woman who flinched at a man's touch to a confident, loved wife and mother who knew her own worth. Jackson had indeed taught her gentleness, but in doing so, he had also helped her discover the strength that had always existed within her, the courage to trust, to love, and finally, to build a life filled with the tenderness she had once believed impossible.